Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Frank Luntz, CEO of FIL Inc., and our esteemed panel.
As the panel takes their seats, and I can now hear my feedback, I am speaking to you from Los Angeles, where it is 6:15 in the morning. It's still better than where I was supposed to be at this moment at the Polish-Ukrainian border. The situation has become so desperate and so dire there that it was deemed unsafe for me to go. Right now, there are several million refugees, many of them young people, just like those who are sitting up on stage right now. And I like to go to them, and we can go down the row. And Veronica, I'm going to ask for you to start. Please tell me something that this audience, either in their homes, in their places of work, or right there in your auditorium, tell me something about you or your generation that we would not know and need to understand. Veronica, let's start with you.
I think people look at it at a very generational outlook for the young people of my age, and I don't think that we can define a whole generation by one single attribute. That's what I want the people of this generation to know about people my age. We're willing to push boundaries and develop new ways of thinking without the preconceived notions of our parents and the people that came before us. And I think that that's what creates change, and that's what creates innovation for better quality of life.
Breona, if you can answer the same question, what do the people in that room not really understand about your generation?
I think most importantly, wanting to provide context for the things that we advocate for. I think oftentimes we can get focused on the what instead of the why behind it. And I think most importantly for the things that we do advocate for and the things that we do care about, 9 times out of 10, they usually come from a place of compassion. So wanting to provide that context and always keeping the why at the forefront.
Very good. Michael, if you can give an answer to that question.
Yeah, I think, put it the most simply, I think we're ready to advocate. I mean, we can use our own university, for example, here in Lexington. There are over 500 student organizations, all of which have some involvement when it comes to advocacy, when it comes to service, when it comes to a charitable organization that they're working for. You know, students are really excited to not only go out and advocate for what they believe in, but be passionate about it, no matter whether that's a geopolitical issue, whether that's something as small as, I joke in SJ all the time, fixing a pothole on the street, being passionate about what you believe in and being willing to fight for that thing.
Joseph, you're a PhD candidate. What do we not understand about your generation?
Well, kind of building off of that sentiment is we have to not just have something that's worth fighting for, but I think that for some of us that comes naturally, or it comes, if you will, with life, right? And so I think it's very important that the older generation creates that space for the younger generation to be able to maneuver in those areas and try to make improvements around their cause that they see. And so if there is some hope in that way, then there will obviously be progress.
Michaela, what don't we know?
I think there's a lot of positives about our generation and a lot that we want to do. But something that I have noticed, and I'm sure a lot of you have noticed, is that our generation is suffering from a lot of mental health issues. And I think generations before us think, oh, they're kids, they're resilient, they get through it. But we've seen with COVID and shutdowns and isolation, just how affected our generation is. And the stigma is still there to this day. And there needs to be an emphasis on allowing our generation the space to get help and encourage them to get help for this overall crisis with mental health that I think our generation is still suffering through.
So I can put numbers behind that. In the polling that we did, we found that over 40% of parents believe that their own children have suffered trauma. So it's approaching half of the population because of COVID. I want to ask a couple of you to answer that question. How has COVID changed your life? We know that it's caused people to change their jobs. We know that it's caused people to change their lifestyle. We know that it's caused people to change where they want to live, even their friendships and where they collect their news. For two of you or three of you, how has COVID changed your life? Please go ahead.
Yeah, I can go ahead and answer that question. As a student, you know, we were in person, and then we were online, and then we were forced to go back in person. And it seemed as though there was no thought given to how that learning curve would affect us. And I think that put a lot of stress on young people and students in general. You know, we are adaptable, but to some point, there is a lot of stress to that transition. And I think students are still working through that transition and that stress.
Yeah. I think one of the magical things of college is, for better or for worse, the first day you get to college, you are thrown in a 10-foot pool with cinder blocks on your ankles, and you have to figure it out. And what's so interesting is, you know, we were thrown into that a little bit, at least us upperclassmen, because we got that normal college experience. But I worry for the people who are like my brother, who's a freshman here at UK, who never really got that real high school experience. He never had a high school prom. He never got to go to homecoming in high school. He never had those very developmentally important things that American youth have all the time. And I really wonder and worry how that's going to affect people long term.
Go ahead.
I would add to that it's not just in the classroom, because sometimes you can't change a classroom setting to change it to completely on Zoom. I'm a data analytics minor. We code, we use software, we use stuff like Tableau, Python. You can't sometimes necessarily learn that all through a screen while your professor is trying to navigate you through that. It's just not possible. It's not the same. And if you have asked questions, you can't really do that. We can't transfer that learning experience to Zoom. As well, I know some of us are presidents of several student organizations on campus. We couldn't have in-person meetings. It was very important not just for us to go to class and everything, but try to figure out what we want to do with our degrees. I'm president of the Economic Society. For a year, we couldn't have meetings. We couldn't bring in speakers from several different industries to help navigate these students, what they're going to do with their economic degrees, how they can go into the workforce. So we got very negatively affected. We couldn't have a lot of events. I know we're involved in student organizations, student government, stuff like that, and all of that stuff could not happen because of COVID.
Right, and just real quick, kind of with that, for me, just being as different as I am, it was really scary, and I wasn't afraid necessarily of getting COVID. I was afraid of the whole kind of group kind of thinking, and how that might look if things spiral to a certain extent, you know, bigger picture kind of a thing. And so not having those kinds of interactions and contact, being that more isolated, it makes it even that much more scarier, where you start thinking, what if they want to do this or that, depending on a person's health status.
So I got to ask you, and these are the two questions I get more than any other in discussions like this. The new normal, are we going back to the way things were, or are things permanently changed? For you all, do you want to go back to the way things were and have that life return? Or do you want it to happen in some sort of different way? And any of you can answer that.
I think I can go first. I would say from some new normal, I'm a person where I don't think going back in any kind of scenario, whether it's pre-COVID or whatever, I don't think going back is helpful. I think it's really important to say, what have we learned from COVID? I know, for one example, like, I'm gonna wear a mask on a subway in flu season, but like, there's so many things that we can take out of this pandemic, as negative as it has been for this country and the world. Take it out and make positive change, not only to our society, but to our businesses, to higher education, et cetera.
And
Such as, hold on. Michael, be specific. So many changes. Offer your audience one of them.
Well, I think from one degree, you know, my uncle is a vice president of a semiconductor company, and he would spend half his year in China or in India. And I think he realized, he said, you know, it's useless and it's expensive for me to fly 12 hours across the world for me to see something that I can see on a 30-minute meeting over Zoom. And why is my company wasting money sending me all the way across the world when I can do that right here? And I think that's really beneficial for us, you know, because to some degree, we never had virtual meetings before COVID. Like, the idea of you being here on hybrid in LA, like, 3 years ago, I would have been like, why are we even doing this? Like, he's not here, this isn't gonna be productive. But we found how productive that virtual connection can be. And at times, we may not prefer it, but it is the best option, at least for our businesses, and to make us most productive.
And I think going back towards that mental health context, we've seen how that flexibility has really impacted my generation and the generations before me, mental health, having that flexibility, being able to be at home and get what you need to get done and do it in the time that's best for you and your productivity schedule. And I think having that flexibility coming from COVID, especially in the work life, it creates a good work-life balance, and that's something that I think should continue moving on from COVID.
And I'm going to give let me give a statistic behind that, which is now 1 out of 4 workers will not do a job that requires them to be at work 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, 12 months a year. 1 out of 4 is going to turn that down because they demand the flexibility. So we know the numbers are behind you, that we aren't going to return to that kind of in-place work. I hope that we do so with education, because you're right, it's not the same as someone not being there. But please go ahead, one more of you. How has life changed?
I just wanted to add, I really do want to go back to fully normal. I'm a DACA student. I'm a Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals recipient. So COVID really affected how those offices worked. So what does that mean for me and people like me? There's 800,000 undocumented students that are under DACA. So you have to file your renewal at least 8 months before it, but offices got so backtracked with COVID that now I have to file a year in advance. And I always had that worry when I was leading up to that of like, is it going to be filed on time for me to continue school, for me to continue my internships, for me to have the positions that I hold? And a lot of the advantages that I got from DACA, I had that worry because of COVID. So at least from my perspective, and something that I deal with on a day-to-day basis that is so important to many students like me, I do want to go fully back to normal, or at least to some aspect, where the disadvantages that COVID caused is not going to be a problem anymore, because that just means I won't have my regular life. I won't be able to go through my day-to-day activities because of that backtracked cost.
Right.
Breona, you're a clinical leadership and management student. I got to ask you a question that a lot of people in the audience are asking themselves. 40% of your generation prefers socialism to capitalism. I don't know where you stand on it, but please explain why almost half of your generation thinks that capitalism is failing and seeks the benefits of socialism.
Well, I'm definitely not an expert on capitalism and socialism, but I think kind of going back to something I said before, thinking about like context and why we're advocating for the things we do advocate for, most times it comes from a place of compassion. So thinking about how we're able to, use like different models and things, to create systems and to integrate, different ideas into things so that we're able to, like reach people, make like healthcare more accessible, for example, and things like that. So thinking more so the context behind it. And like I said, I'm not an expert on capitalism or socialism, but I think that's kind of more so potentially like a basis and foundation for that.
Yeah. I think something...
Please explain why, because it's causing your parents and your grandparents to blow their minds. Why are so many in your generation more pro-socialist than they are capitalist?
I think what's so interesting, and I think it's very important to realize about this generation, and I know I'm going to make everyone in the audience or online feel old. I don't remember 9/11. Like, I just don't. The first 3 news stories that I remember were the Virginia Tech shooting, Obama being elected, and Occupy Wall Street. A big one being Occupy Wall Street. And, our parents losing jobs. Realizing, one of the first developmental problems that we saw as children was, at least in this case, capitalism failing the country to an extent. And, I think in reality, there are a lot of different arguments, and there's some perfect medium to, I think, a mix of socialism and capitalism. But it makes total sense to me as to why our generation would feel that, because that's what we've grown up on. We lived 6 years of our life in a recession.
Right, no, from a historical context, it goes back to the whole, information age, if you will, right? And so people are inclined to, and part of the reason why you're having mental health kind of instabilities kind of thing more so is because it's a whole, that is a different kind of a new normal where people are making their connections virtually and online and through social media. So that, I think, fuels some of that kind of way of thinking, one, as far as being more of a socialist kind of perspective, but also I think creates an innate human drive to want to build with other people because we're missing that, whereas our grandparents or our parents that grew up around each other and was more of a competition, a sports kind of society, they're drawn to capitalism more naturally.
And going with that social media, we're connected to places that we weren't connected to before, and we're seeing where these models are working, where people are creating the change and not having to pay millions and millions of dollars for healthcare, and we see how that system works in other places, and we're more connected to that because of social media now. And so having that connection, I think, is creating these ideas in our generation to implement here in the US.
Sure, you're connected, but you're also angry.
Yeah.
And you feel disconnected to real life. We know how social media has impacted all of you. What do you want to see? Do you want to see it unregulated? Do you want to see a kind of a wild, wild west? This is one of the questions they're asking Washington right now, and they're asking it because of your generation and how it has affected your behavior online, how it affects your behavior offline. Should we be concerned, any of you, about the impact of social media on your lives?
I would just like to say that I have a very different perspective than all the different people that are sitting on this panel. I lean more capitalist because I grew up in an area that didn't have the opportunities that my whole family came to America to give me those opportunities. I have a lot of friends that are from Venezuela, that these things did not work, these markets did not work, they had to flee and leave everything behind. So I have a very different perspective on it. I think we should leave a little bit more capitalist because we have that sense of opportunity that I didn't have in my country, and my family had to leave everything behind. I didn't know how to speak English when I came to America. I had to pick that up on my own, and now people that get to know me, they're like, oh, English is not your native language? And I was like, no, it wasn't. And the sole fact that I'm standing in front of you guys and I'm about to graduate a month from now is just so bizarre to a lot of people that come from my background and from other countries where socialism did not work, a mix of that did not work. So that's why I don't agree with that statement necessarily. And I really don't like that my generation does lean that way. And because we see it through a lens on our screen on Instagram, I don't think you can necessarily just believe in that statement because of everything you see on Instagram, because people have fled their country to escape that model.
Hey, yeah. Veronica, you are so impressive. I hear no accent. What you've achieved, your success is one that every student in any city, in any country could emulate.
Thank you.
So I congratulate you.
Thank you.
I'd like to close this by asking each of you, all five of you, you've got an audience there, you've got an audience that's watching at home or at work. What should our priority be? If we want to have an impact on your generation, what should we do? And Breona, I'll start with you. Mm-hmm. Just very quickly, what should we do to make your generation better off?
I think really just allowing us the space to explore. I think our generation's one that's very curious and interested in learning different ideas and hearing different perspectives. So I think in any way in which you can support spaces and facilitate those spaces that allow us to explore and gain more knowledge in different areas, I think that's probably the biggest thing that could contribute greatly to us.
Joseph, what would you tell the world?
Very similarly, especially when you're coming from marginalized populations, when you get to a certain place where you can open doors for others, to make sure that you do that and be proactive in it and not just kind of passive in that way. Yeah.
Veronica?
Not isolate yourself to one thing. Learning things and things time again, and just going to an institution as good as UK, allowing myself to just grow and stuff. So to create a bigger perspective for yourself and not just isolate yourself with one single thing, not have those preconceived notions, and being having that open-mindedness to say, well, maybe I am wrong, but why? And that's where that knowledge comes into play that will help us make us better decisions for our future, to create better impacts and have an overall better quality of life for everyone.
It's one of the reasons why mentorship has been so important, so impactful. We got two more of you. Michael?
Yeah, I think the most important thing is to bring us to the table. I think we're ready to advocate, and we're a diverse and passionate group of people. You know, whether it's, as I said earlier, whether it's something as, you know, worldwide as a geopolitical issue, or something as small as, you know, a local issue in a city, or an issue when it comes to just, you know, business strategy or what it may be. Bring us to the table. We know what we're talking about, and we're ready to help.
There's one more of you. Go ahead.
I think just providing us that reassurance. I think for the longest time, we've been kind of placed in a box and told what we can and can't do. And our generation wants to advocate and wants that change, but I do think we need that reassurance because we've been told for so long that you have to follow this path. So just giving us that reassurance that we can think outside of the box.
Well, I know you can, and I know you're going to be successful. And if you are any example of the students both at that university, in the state, in the Commonwealth, or across the country, we're going to be just fine. So everyone, thank you very much for listening. And please keep in mind that this generation needs a hand up, but they don't need a handout. And it's important that not only do you listen and learn, but help them to lead. Concordia, thank you for sponsoring this program, and we'll give it back to you.